Welcome to Ancient Relics Keeper. Uncover the hidden secrets of history, from ancient mysteries to lost civilizations. Join us on this thrilling journey. Subscribe and dive into the unknown. For generations, we were taught a simple story of human civilization. First, humans learned to farm. This agricultural revolution led to settled villages, which then grew into cities. Only then, with surplus food and a stable society, did we have the time and resources for complex religion, art, and monumental architecture. It's a story that makes perfect sense. But what if that story is completely wrong? In the remote hills of southeastern Turkey, a discovery was made that turned the story of our past on its head. It's a place called Göbekli Tepe. It is a vast, sophisticated complex of massive stone pillars, intricately carved with strange and powerful animals. It is, without a doubt, a temple or something even more complex. But here is the impossible fact. Göbekli Tepe is 12,000 years old. That's more than 6,000 years older than Stonehenge, 7,000 years older than the pyramids. It was built by people we thought were simple hunter-gatherers, people who supposedly hadn't even invented pottery or farming yet. Why did nomadic hunters build the world's first cathedral on a lonely hilltop? What cosmic event did they witness that compelled them to carve stone on a scale that shouldn't have been possible? Today, we dig into the secrets of Göbekli Tepe, a place that suggests it wasn't agriculture that started civilization, but a profound and shared idea. Every great discovery has an origin story. It's often a tale of chance, intuition, and dogged persistence against the odds. The story of Göbekli Tepe is no different. It isn't just a story about the distant past. It's a modern detective story, a puzzle that lay hidden in plain sight for decades, waiting for the right person to come along and recognize its true significance. To understand the impossible nature of what lies beneath that Turkish hilltop, we first have to understand the improbable journey of how it was found. This is the story of unearthing the impossible. Our story begins not with a dramatic discovery, but with a quiet, almost dismissive observation. We go back to the 1960s, a time of great archaeological activity in southeastern Turkey. A joint team of researchers from the University of Chicago and Istanbul University are conducting a sweeping survey of the region. Their goal is to map out sites of historical interest, to create a comprehensive record of the area's past. One day, their work brings them to a prominent, gently rounded hill that the local Kurdish farmers call Göbekli Tepe, which translates to Potbelly Hill. As they walk the hill, they notice things. The soil is littered with countless fragments of flint, the telltale sign of ancient human activity. More intriguingly, they find large, rectangular slabs of worked limestone poking out of the ground. They are clearly man-made. The team dutifully records their findings. They note the presence of the stones and the flint. But then they make a crucial and, as it turns out, colossal error of judgment. They look at the site and see what they expect to see. They theorize that the hill is not a natural formation. They believe it's a tumulus, an artificial mound, likely a Byzantine or early medieval cemetery. In their minds, the worked limestone slabs were nothing more than broken headstones from these relatively recent graves. The site, they conclude, has been disturbed by centuries of farming and is probably of little significant archaeological value. They write up their report, file it away, and move on. The Potbelly Hill, having briefly caught the attention of the outside world, is once again left to its solitude, its monumental secret still safe beneath the soil. For 30 years, the greatest archaeological discovery of the 21st century would lie dormant, dismissed as a footnote in a forgotten survey. The story could have ended there, a missed opportunity buried in an archive. But a great discovery often requires a prepared mind. Fast forward 3 decades to 1994. We meet a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt. Schmidt is not a newcomer to the region. He is a seasoned expert in the Stone Age, having spent years excavating a nearby Neolithic settlement. He is deeply familiar with the types of tools and artifacts left behind by the earliest inhabitants of this land. One day, while researching, he stumbles across that old 1960s survey report. He reads the brief, dismissive entry about Göbekli Tepe. Most people would have read it and moved on. But for Schmidt, something didn't add up. His experience told him that Byzantine cemeteries don't typically feature such a massive concentration of flint debris. And the description of the limestone slabs, it sparked a flicker of intuition, a professional hunch that the original surveyors had missed something vital. He couldn't shake the feeling. He decided he had to see the hill for himself. So, he traveled to the remote location, hiring a local taxi to take him as close as it could get, and then walked the final stretch up the dusty slope of the Potbelly Hill. What happened next has become the stuff of archaeological legend. Within minutes of arriving, Klaus Schmidt knew. He wasn't just looking at a medieval cemetery. His trained eye saw something entirely different. He saw the sheer quantity and quality of the flint chippings and knew they were telltale signs of a massive, prehistoric flint workshop, on a scale he had never seen before. Then he looked at the limestone slabs again. They were not crude, broken headstones. They were clearly parts of much larger, deliberately shaped megaliths. In that moment, standing alone on that windy hill, he had a breathtaking realization. He knew with absolute certainty that he was standing on top of something immense, something incredibly ancient, and something far more important than a simple cemetery. He would later say, "I knew if I didn't walk away immediately, I would be here for the rest of my life." He did not walk away. The secret of Göbekli Tepe had finally found the person who could understand its language. Klaus Schmidt dedicated the rest of his life to that hill. The very next year, in 1995, the first real excavations began. With a small team and the permission of the Turkish authorities, he started to peel back the earth, layer by layer. The work was slow and meticulous. The world of archaeology was not yet holding its breath. To them, this was still just a promising, but unproven prehistoric site. But what Schmidt and his team began to uncover would soon change everything. They chose a spot where one of the large limestone slabs was protruding from the ground. They began to dig around it, carefully removing the accumulated soil and rubble. As they went deeper, the true nature of the slab was revealed. It wasn't just a slab. It was the top of a massive, T-shaped pillar, standing upright, exactly where its builders had left it thousands of years ago. This was the first monumental discovery. It was proof that this was not a site of collapsed ruins, but a place of intentionally placed, standing stones. The team's excitement grew. They expanded the excavation area around this first pillar. And as they did, more T-shaped heads began to emerge from the dirt. It slowly became clear that the first pillar was not alone. It was part of a circle, a huge, deliberately arranged circle of megalithic pillars, all standing in silent testament to a forgotten age. But the revelations didn't stop there. As they cleared the first circle, which they would later call Enclosure D, they discovered it was not the only one. Using ground-penetrating radar and further test pits, they found that the hill was hiding a complex of these structures. Next to the first circle was another, then another and another, all interconnected, built at different times over many centuries. It was not a single monument. It was a vast, sprawling sacred complex, a prehistoric cathedral built and rebuilt over generations. With each passing season of excavation, the true, staggering scale of what lay beneath their feet became clearer. This was not a village. This was not a settlement. This was something else entirely. It was a place of gathering, a place of ritual, a place built by a people who, according to our history books, should not have been capable of such a feat. The monumental scale of the site was shocking enough. But the most earth-shattering revelation was yet to come. As the team excavated, they were not just removing sterile dirt. The circles had been intentionally filled in antiquity with a dense mixture of rock rubble, soil, and, crucially, a vast amount of organic material, mostly animal bones, the leftovers from countless feasts. This fill, which had so perfectly preserved the structures, also contained the key to their age. This brings us to the final, jaw-dropping chapter of the discovery story. Dating the dream. Klaus Schmidt and his team carefully collected samples of this organic material, charcoal from ancient hearths and collagen from the animal bones from the lowest, and therefore oldest, layers of the fill. They sent these samples off for radiocarbon dating, a technique that can measure the age of organic remains with a high degree of accuracy. Then they waited. When the results came back, they were simply unbelievable. They had to be checked and rechecked. The scientific community was stunned. The oldest layers of Göbekli Tepe, associated with the grandest of the stone circles, dated to approximately 9,600 BC. To put that number in perspective, let's stop and consider what it means. It means Göbekli Tepe is almost 12,000 years old. That is more than twice the age of the Great Pyramid of Giza. It is more than 6,000 years older than Stonehenge. It predates the invention of writing, the invention of the wheel, and even the invention of pottery. It was built in a remote and distant past known as the pre-pottery Neolithic. This single fact shattered the established timeline of human history. The builders of Göbekli Tepe were hunter-gatherers. They were nomadic or semi-nomadic people, moving across the landscape, hunting wild animals and gathering wild plants. According to the long-held story of civilization, such people should have been living in small, egalitarian bands, too preoccupied with daily survival to organize such a massive, labor-intensive construction project. The idea that hunter-gatherers could quarry 15-ton monoliths, transport them, and carve them with sophisticated art was simply unthinkable. The discovery of Göbekli Tepe's true age flipped the script. It proved that complex, large-scale religious architecture came before the invention of agriculture and settled cities. It suggested that the need to come together for a shared, sacred purpose was one of the most ancient and powerful driving forces in human society. The impossible had been unearthed. The history books were not just wrong. They were wrong by thousands of years. The quiet Potbelly Hill was no longer a footnote. It had become the first chapter in a new and much more mysterious story of human civilization. The discovery of Göbekli Tepe's impossible age was a shockwave that rattled the foundations of archaeology. But to truly grasp its significance, we must move beyond the dates and the headlines. We need to walk among the stones themselves. We need to see what the builders saw and touch what they created. So, let's descend into the excavated enclosures and explore the key features of this prehistoric cathedral. Let's dissect the anatomy of this place, piece by piece, to understand the mind of its creators. Our walkthrough begins with the most iconic and defining element of the entire site, the T-shaped pillars. As we step into one of the sunken circular enclosures, these are the first things that dominate our senses. They are everywhere, rising from the earth like silent, stoic guardians. They are not random boulders or crude standing stones. Each one is a monolith, carved from a single massive piece of limestone, quarried from the surrounding bedrock. And they all share the same distinctive T-shape. The scale is breathtaking. Many of the pillars tower over us, some reaching more than 5 meters, or 16 feet, in height. Their weight is even more impressive, with the largest ones estimated to weigh between 10 and 15 tons. That's the equivalent of 2 or 3 large elephants. We are immediately confronted with a question of engineering. How did a society of hunter-gatherers, with no beasts of burden and no knowledge of the wheel, quarry these immense blocks of stone? How did they transport them from the quarry, which is located hundreds of meters away on the plateau, and then lift them into a vertical position with such care and precision? The logistical challenge is immense, suggesting a level of social organization and shared purpose that we simply didn't believe was possible for this period of human history. But it's their form, not just their size, that is so captivating. As we look closer, we see that the T-shape is not an abstract symbol. It is a highly stylized representation of the human form. Carved in low relief along the narrow edges of the pillars, we can clearly see long, slender arms. The arms are bent at the elbow, and the hands, with their long, spidery fingers, are depicted resting over the front of the pillar, pointing down towards a carved belt and loincloth. The horizontal bar of the T is the head, but it is a head with no face. There are no eyes, no nose, no mouth. It is an anonymous, abstracted being. This deliberate lack of facial features is a powerful artistic choice. It suggests these are not portraits of specific individuals, like kings or ancestors. Instead, they seem to represent something more universal, perhaps supernatural beings, revered spirits, or the very first gods. They are powerful, imposing, and watchful, but their faceless nature makes them distant and unknowable. Standing among them feels like being in the presence of silent, stone entities from another world. These incredible pillars are not placed randomly. They are part of a larger, deliberate design. As we step back to take in the whole enclosure, we see the second key element of the site's anatomy: the stone circles. The pillars are arranged in a series of circular or, more accurately, oval-shaped enclosures. To date, archaeologists have uncovered 4 of these large, main enclosures from the oldest layer, with many more smaller, rectangular structures from a later period. Each enclosure is a self-contained world. They are sunken into the hillside, with low walls made of rough, uncut stone built between the larger pillars, separating the sacred space within from the mundane world outside. The layout of each circle follows a consistent and powerful pattern. In the very center of each enclosure stand 2 massive, central T-shaped pillars. These 2 are always the largest and most impressive in the circle. They are not oriented randomly. They are placed parallel to each other, facing one another as if locked in a silent, eternal conversation. They are the focal point, the heart of the entire structure. The smaller pillars that form the outer ring are all oriented to face inward, their faceless heads all turned towards this central pair. The effect is immediate and profound. It creates the feeling of a gathering. We are not just in a circle of stones. We are in a circle of beings. The outer pillars are like attendees, an audience, or a congregation, their attention fixed on the 2 dominant figures in the center. The space is charged with a dynamic, focused energy. What does this arrangement signify? It could be a representation of a mythical event, a meeting of divine beings. The 2 central pillars might represent a fundamental duality at the core of their belief system: male and female, light and dark, life and death, sky and earth. The surrounding pillars could be lesser spirits, or perhaps stylized representations of different human tribes, all gathered in unison to witness this central mystery. It's a theater in the round, built for the gods, where the key actors are frozen in stone. To stand in the center of one of these circles is to feel like you have stepped into the middle of a sacred meeting that has been in session for 12,000 years. The pillars and their arrangement are stunning enough, but as we move closer to the stones, we discover another layer of complexity, another world of meaning. This is the third and perhaps most fascinating element of our walkthrough: the zoological masterpieces carved onto their surfaces. The pillars are not blank canvases. Many of them are covered in a rich tapestry of intricate, low-relief carvings, executed with a level of artistry and naturalism that is simply astounding for such a remote period. But the subject of these carvings is what truly captures the imagination. This is not the art of daily life. We do not see images of hunting, farming, or building. We do not see depictions of plants or cozy family scenes. Instead, we are confronted with a parade of powerful, wild, and often dangerous animals. Snarling foxes with bared teeth leap across the stone. Long, sinuous snakes slither in tangled masses. A wild boar, its tusks prominent, charges forward with ferocious energy. Spiders and scorpions, their venomous nature unmistakable, crawl across the surface. Towering cranes and storks stand in profile, and majestic wild bulls, or aurochs, display their impressive horns. And above all, there is the vulture, a creature often associated with death and the excarnation of bodies, its wings spread wide. This is a strange and menacing menagerie. These are, for the most part, not the primary animals that the people of Göbekli Tepe were hunting for food. Analysis of the animal bones found at the site shows they were eating mostly gazelle and other herbivores. The animals carved on the pillars seem to belong to a different realm, the realm of myth, symbol, and fear. They are totem animals, spirit guides, or terrifying demons from their cosmology. The carvings are not just random doodles. They are often arranged in complex scenes, telling stories we no longer have the key to decipher. On some pillars, a fox seems to be leaping over the arm of the T-shaped being. On others, a complex web of snakes interacts with other creatures. These carvings give us our most direct, yet most enigmatic, glimpse into the minds of these ancient people. They lived in a world populated not just by other humans, but by powerful animal spirits that had to be respected, feared, and appeased. The pillars were not just statues of gods. They were living portals, decorated with the powerful fauna of the spirit world. There is one final, bizarre feature of this prehistoric cathedral, one that is not immediately visible, but is crucial to understanding its history. It is the very reason the site survived in such a pristine state. After centuries of use, the people of Göbekli Tepe did something inexplicable. They undertook the laborious process of the deliberate burial of their own sacred enclosures. This was not a case of a city being abandoned and slowly reclaimed by nature. The evidence is clear that the burial was an intentional, organized, and monumental act. Circle by circle, the builders or their descendants filled these sacred spaces to the brim. They brought in millions of fragments of limestone, thousands of flint tools, and a massive quantity of animal bones, likely the remnants of huge ceremonial feasts that marked the closing of each enclosure. They packed this material in and around the standing pillars, carefully burying them until the entire structure was submerged. Over time, they covered it all with earth, creating the artificial potbelly hill that Klaus Schmidt first encountered. This act of deliberate burial is perhaps the deepest mystery of all. Why would a society expend such a colossal amount of energy to build a magnificent temple, only to expend an equally massive amount of energy to entomb it? The reasons are a matter of intense debate. Was it an act of decommissioning? Perhaps the rituals and beliefs associated with a particular enclosure had run their course, and it needed to be respectfully put to sleep before a new one was built nearby. Was it an act of preservation? Maybe they knew a time of great change was coming, and they wanted to protect their sacred knowledge for a distant future generation for us to find. Or was it an act of fear? If the temple was built to commemorate a terrifying cosmic event, as some theories suggest, perhaps later generations decided the memory was too dangerous to keep alive, and they chose to literally bury the past. Whatever the reason, this final act is as significant as the construction itself. It tells us that the end of Göbekli Tepe's active life was not a tragedy, but a planned event. They were not just builders. They were also curators of their own history, choosing what to preserve and what to hide. Standing on the hill today, we are the beneficiaries of this final, enigmatic act, left to wonder why these ancient people so carefully buried their world, leaving us with a 12,000-year-old puzzle. To walk through the stone circles of Göbekli Tepe is to be overwhelmed by a sense of profound, intentional design. This was not a random collection of stones. This was a message, a cosmic blueprint carved in limestone, left behind by a people on the other side of a vast ocean of time. But what is the message? What were they trying to say? The builders left us no writing, no instruction manual. All we have are the clues they left behind. The shapes of the pillars, the carvings on their surfaces, the bones of the dead, and the alignment of the stars above. Decoding this blueprint is the great challenge of Göbekli Tepe. It requires us to move beyond simple description and enter the world of interpretation, piecing together the evidence to reconstruct the lost belief system of our most distant ancestors. Let's delve into the 4 key areas of evidence that offer us a glimpse into their minds. Our first and most fundamental piece of evidence is the pillar itself. We've seen that its T-shape is a stylized human form. But what did this form represent to its creators? The prevailing interpretation is that the pillar is a representation of a sky god or a powerful supernatural being. The key here is the facelessness. The deliberate choice to omit any facial features is a powerful one. It elevates the being from the personal to the universal. These are not portraits of specific chiefs or revered shamans. The anonymity suggests they are something more, entities from the spirit world. The late Klaus Schmidt, the original excavator, believed they were representations of the first gods, a pantheon of divine beings that governed the world of these hunter-gatherers. The arrangement within the circles reinforces this idea. The 2 massive pillars in the center of each enclosure, standing face to face, could represent the primary deities or a fundamental duality in their cosmology. They might be a divine pair, like a sky father and an earth mother, or twin gods representing opposing but complementary forces, such as creation and destruction, or summer and winter. The smaller pillars surrounding them, all facing inward, could then be seen as lesser spirits, demigods, or even the stylized representation of the human congregation, gathered in permanent, silent worship of the central divine pair. The pillars, in this view, were not just statues. They were likely seen as living embodiments of the gods themselves. The stone was a vessel, a conduit through which the power of the spirit world could manifest on earth. The entire enclosure was a house for the gods, a place where the veil between the human world and the divine world was thin, a place where mortals could come to meet their creators. This interpretation suggests that 12,000 years ago, humanity was already grappling with complex theological ideas, creating a pantheon of gods and building monumental homes in which to worship them. This divine interpretation provides a framework, but the details are filled in by the intricate carvings that adorn these stone gods. While many pillars feature a host of animals, there is one stone in particular that has become the focus of intense debate and a truly mind-bending theory. This brings us to our second piece of evidence, the vulture stone and the comet theory. In enclosure D, the largest and one of the oldest circles, stands Pillar 43. It is often called the vulture stone because of the prominent carving of a large vulture on its side. But this pillar is a complex tableau, a dense collection of symbols that seems to tell a specific and dramatic story. We see the vulture and next to it a scorpion, a long-necked bird, and other animal figures. But the most chilling detail is a small, headless human figure depicted at the bottom. The vulture is holding a circular object on its wing, and the entire scene seems charged with a sense of cosmic importance. For a long time, this was interpreted through a purely religious lens, perhaps depicting a sky burial ritual, where vultures would consume the flesh of the dead, carrying their spirits to the heavens. But in recent years, a much more radical interpretation has emerged, championed by researchers like Dr. Martin Sweatman of the University of Edinburgh. They argue that the vulture stone is not just a religious scene. It is a prehistoric astronomical chart, a date stamp for a cataclysmic event that changed the world. The theory goes like this: the animals on the pillar are not just animals. They are constellations. They are the prehistoric ancestors of our own zodiac. Sweatman and his colleagues have used computer software to map the stars as they would have appeared in the sky above Turkey 12,000 years ago. They have found that the arrangement of the scorpion, the vulture, which they associate with the constellation Sagittarius, and the other figures on the pillar precisely matches the arrangement of key constellations in the sky around the year 10,950 BC. What is so special about that date? It coincides exactly with the beginning of the Younger Dryas, a mysterious and devastating period of abrupt climate change. After a period of warming at the end of the last ice age, the planet was suddenly plunged back into near-glacial conditions for over 1,000 years. The cause of the Younger Dryas is a major scientific mystery, but one of the leading theories is the impact of a fragmented comet that struck the Earth or exploded in the atmosphere. The vulture stone, in this interpretation, is a memorial to this cataclysm. The headless human figure represents the widespread death and destruction that it caused. The animals are the constellations marking the date of the event in the sky. And the circle held by the vulture? That could be the comet itself or the sun, indicating the time of year, likely the summer solstice. If this theory is correct, it means the builders of Göbekli Tepe were not only sophisticated astronomers, but they were the survivors of a global catastrophe. It would suggest that the temple was built not just to worship gods, but perhaps to commemorate this terrifying event, a warning or a record for future generations, ensuring that the memory of the day the sky fell would never be forgotten. The possibility of a cosmic catastrophe adds a dramatic layer to the story, but the evidence on the ground points to other, more personal rituals happening at the site. This brings us to our third area of investigation, which focuses on the human remains found at Göbekli Tepe and what they tell us about the beliefs surrounding life and death. This is the evidence for a so-called skull cult and a deep tradition of ancestor worship. While Göbekli Tepe is not a cemetery, no formal graves have been found. Fragments of human bone have been discovered scattered throughout the fill of the enclosures. Most of these are small and fragmented, but a few discoveries stand out. Several pieces of human skulls. These are not just broken pieces. Analysis has shown that these skulls were intentionally processed after death. They were defleshed, cleaned, and in some cases, carved with deep, straight grooves running from front to back. This is not idle doodling. This is evidence of a specific and powerful ritual, one that archaeologists have termed a skull cult. Similar practices are known from other, slightly later Neolithic sites in the region, like Çatalhöyük. In these cultures, the skulls of important individuals, perhaps revered elders, powerful shamans, or even formidable enemies, were separated from the body and used in rituals. The skull was seen as the seat of the soul, the source of a person's identity and power. By preserving and displaying the skull, the living could maintain a connection with the spirit of the deceased, drawing on their wisdom or containing their power. The carved grooves on the Göbekli Tepe skulls are particularly intriguing. They may have been used to anchor a cord, allowing the skull to be hung up for display, or they may have been part of a symbolic ritual to open the skull and release its spiritual energy. This focus on the human head connects directly to the headless human figure on the vulture stone and the faceless heads of the T-shaped pillars. It seems the head held a place of supreme importance in their cosmology. This evidence suggests that alongside any worship of sky gods or commemoration of cosmic events, there was a deeply personal and ancestor-focused element to the rituals here. It was a place where the boundary between the living and the dead was blurred. The community would gather, perhaps feasting in the presence of the skulls of their most honored ancestors, their spirits believed to be watching over the proceedings from the stone pillars that surrounded them. We have a place for gods, a memorial for a cosmic disaster, and a ritual site for ancestor worship. This paints a complex picture. But there is one final piece of the puzzle to consider, one that ties the heavens and the earth together. This is the evidence that suggests Göbekli Tepe was also a sophisticated astronomical observatory. Ancient peoples were intimately familiar with the sky. The movements of the sun, moon, and stars were their clock, their calendar, and their map. It is no surprise that their most sacred sites were often aligned with the cosmos. And Göbekli Tepe appears to be no exception. Archaeologists and archaeoastronomers have begun to map the alignments of the stone circles with meticulous detail. Preliminary studies suggest the alignments are not random. For example, in several of the enclosures, a line drawn through the two central pillars seems to point directly to the spot on the horizon where the star Sirius would have risen in that era. Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, held the position of great importance in many ancient cultures, including, much later, the Egyptians. Other theories propose that holes carved into some of the stones may have acted as sighting tubes, allowing observers to track specific celestial objects as they moved across the sky. The entire layout of the complex could have been a massive calendrical device, designed to mark the solstices and equinox, key turning points of the year that were vital for a society dependent on the seasonal cycles of plants and animals. This function as an observatory doesn't contradict the other interpretations. It complements them. The temple was a place to watch the heavens because the heavens were the home of the gods and the source of cosmic messages. Tracking the stars was not a purely scientific act. It was a deeply religious one. It was a way of understanding the divine plan, of predicting the future, and of synchronizing human life on Earth with the great eternal cycles of the cosmos. The cosmic blueprint, then, was literal. Göbekli Tepe was a place built to read the sky, to commune with the gods who lived there, and to remember the day when a message from that sky changed their world forever. We have journeyed to a forbidden hill in Turkey. We have walked one last time. The intricate, analytical score broadens into a powerful, sweeping, and thought-provoking orchestral theme. It among its impossible pillars and decoded the cryptic messages carved into their surfaces. We have seen a temple for faceless gods, azed the sound of paradigm shifts and grand conclusions. We have journeyed to the windswept hills of memorial to a cosmic catastrophe, and a ritual ground for a cult of skulls. But now we must step back from the details. Turkey. We have walked among the silent, T-shaped gods. We have deciphered the clues carved into their stone and asked the most important question of all. What does it all mean? The discovery of Göbekli Tepe skins. Now, it is time to step back from the details and look at the whole picture. It is time to ask, is not just another interesting find that adds a new footnote to our history books. It is a tectonic event, an earthquake, the most important question of all. What does it all mean? The discovery of Göbekli Tepe is more in our understanding of the past that has shattered the very foundations of what we thought it meant to be civilized. The existence than just another dot on the map of the ancient world. It is a seismic event in our understanding of our own past. It doesn't just add a new chapter to the story of humanity. It forces us to tear out the old chapters, and of this site forces us to confront a series of revolutionary ideas, each one challenging a core assumption about our own origin story. This is the great revolution of Göbekli Tepe. The first and most powerful theme of this revolution is what begin again, with a new and much more mysterious preface. The existence of this single site creates a revolution in thought, challenging our most. It tells us about the very engine of civilization. For more than a century, we have accepted a simple, linear model for fundamental assumptions about who we are and where we come from. Let's explore the four great revolutions that Göbekli Tepe has unleashed upon the modern world. The first and most profound revolution is a complete reversal of the timeline of civilization. for our progress. It's a story we all learned in school. The story goes like this. First, around 10 over a century, we have been told a simple linear story. This brings us to our first theme. The 000 years ago, humans invented agriculture. This was the Neolithic Revolution. For the first time, we had a stable primacy of belief, or the religion-first hypothesis. The old story went like this, around 10, predictable food source. This allowed us to stop wandering and create permanent settlements. These villages, with their surplus food and 000 BC, humanity made a breakthrough discovery called agriculture. For the first time, we learned to cultivate plants and domesticate sedentary lifestyle, then provided the foundation for everything else. Complex society, social hierarchy, specialized labor, and finally, the luxury of animals. This agricultural revolution was the spark that lit the fuse of civilization. Because we could now produce our own food, we abstract thought, which led to organized religion and monumental architecture. It was a neat, materialistic explanation. Economics came first, and no longer had to wander the landscape as hunter-gatherers. We could settle down in one place, creating permanent villages. With culture followed. This brings us to our first revolutionary theme, the primacy of belief, or the religion-first hypothesis. A stable food supply, populations grew. This surplus of food and people freed up some individuals to become specialists. Potters, weavers. Göbekli Tepe takes that entire model and turns it completely upside down. The oldest layers of this site are dated to builders. As villages grew into towns and then cities, complex societies emerged. And only then, at the very end of 9600 BC. This is the very beginning of the Neolithic period, a time when widespread agriculture had not yet this long chain of events. Did we have the time, the resources, and the organizational structure for luxuries like complex religion and monumental architecture? The story was simple. First comes the farm, then the town, then the temple. Go taken hold in this region. The builders were, by all accounts, hunter-gatherers. Yet here they were, building a massive, complex cathedral before they had even built permanent houses for themselves. They were building a home for the gods before Göbekli Tepe single-handedly demolishes this entire model. The oldest layers of the site date back to 9600 BC, right at the dawn of the proposed agricultural revolution. But the people who built it were, by all evidence, hunter-gatherer. They had built a city for themselves. This leads to a staggering conclusion, an idea championed by the late Klaus Schmidt himself. What if it wasn't agriculture that led to settlement and religion? What if it was the other way around? What ifers? There is no sign of domesticated plants or animals in these early layers. These were people who lived off the wild bounty, a powerful, shared belief system. A new religion or a profound spiritual awakening came first. Let's consider the of the land, which at the time was a lush, game-rich paradise. Yet these simple nomads achieved logistics. Building Göbekli Tepe would have required hundreds of workers, drawn from different nomadic bands across a vast region. Something that was supposed to be impossible. They organized themselves on a massive scale. They quarried, transported, and erected would have needed to cooperate, to organize labor, to plan for the future. And most importantly, they would have needed to be a complex of stone temples that would be a challenge to build even for later agricultural societies. This reverses the entire formula fed. The sheer scale of the project would have placed an immense strain on the local environment's supply of wild game, and Göbekli Tepe suggests that the temple came before the town and the farm. It suggests that and plants. The religion-first hypothesis suggests that the intense social and logistical demands of building and maintaining this central ceremonial site abstract idea powerful, shared belief system was the primary driving force. The late excavator Klaus Schmidt famously was the very catalyst that sparked the invention of agriculture. Perhaps they started by cultivating wild grasses on the slopes, summarized this revolution by saying, "First came the temple, then the city. The immense challenge of building this sacred site of the hill, not to create villages, but simply to feed the workers who gathered for the great construction projects. Perhaps they may have been the very catalyst that spurred the invention of agriculture. Imagine hundreds, perhaps thousands, of people gathering from across. First domesticated animals were not for sustenance in a village, but for ceremonial feasting and sacrifice at the temple. In this revolutionary the region to work on this massive project. They would need to be fed. The wild resources of the immediate area would new model, the idea created the economy. A shared belief, a common purpose, the need to build the sacred place on quickly be depleted. This would create immense pressure to find a more stable, reliable food source. The builders may have started the hill was the powerful magnet that drew people together, forced them to innovate, and laid the social and economic groundwork for the cultivating wild grasses and managing wild herds, not as a primary way of life, but as a way to support the sacred construction settled world to come. It suggests that the first thing that truly makes us civilized is not a full stomach, but a project. The idea created the society, not the other way around. The human urge to connect with the divine, to build shared dream. This new model of our past forces us to reevaluate the lives of the very people who built this something for eternity, was not the result of civilization. It was its cause. This new model forces us to completely place. Our modern perception of hunter-gatherers is often colored by a sense of patronizing sympathy. We see there reevaluate the lives of our pre-agricultural ancestors. We have a tendency to look back at the Stone Age with a certain lives as nasty, brutish, and short, a constant, desperate struggle for survival against the harsh realities of the condescension, seeing it as a brutal, primitive time. This brings us to our second revolution, challenging the hunter-natural world. We view the invention of agriculture as a great leap forward that freed us from this precarious existence. But go-gatherer paradox, and rediscovering a lost golden age. Our popular image of hunter-gatherers is one of small. Göbekli Tepe presents us with a profound paradox, leading to our second revolutionary theme. A lost golden age, or the nomadic bands, constantly on the move, their lives a desperate hand-to-mouth struggle for survival. We hunter-gatherer paradox. The evidence at Göbekli Tepe paints a picture that is completely at odds with our see them as perpetually on the brink of starvation, their time consumed by the hunt for the next meal, with little energy image of struggling nomads. These were people who had the time to devote to massive, non-utilitarian construction projects that left over for art, culture, or grand construction projects. This view paints pre-agricultural life as nasty, would have taken decades, if not centuries, to complete. They had the resources to support a large workforce, brutish and short. Göbekli Tepe presents a powerful contradiction to this image. The people who built this evidenced by the millions of animal bones, mostly gazelle, found at the site, suggesting grand ceremonial feasts on a regular complex, were not starving. The sheer volume of animal bones found at the site, tens of thousands of them, points to massive basis. They had the specialized knowledge to quarry, transport, and erect 15-ton monoliths with feasts. They were not just surviving, they were thriving. The land provided such a rich abundance of wild game, fruits, astronomical precision, and they had the artistic genius to cover these stones with masterful, symbolic carvings. This nuts and grasses that they had a significant surplus. And what did they do with this surplus of time and energy? They does not sound like a society on the brink of starvation. In fact, it suggests the very opposite. It implies that for just sit around. They chose to invest it in a project of breathtaking ambition and artistic sophistication. This suggests these people, in this specific region, the pre-agricultural world, was a time of incredible abundance. The land was so that for some people in some parts of the world, the pre-agricultural era was not a dark age of struggle. It rich, the wild game so plentiful, that they could secure their daily needs with relative ease, leaving them with a significant surplus of time and energy. And what did they do with this surplus? They didn't just sit around. They channeled may, in fact, have been a kind of golden age. A time of relative leisure, rich culture, and deep spiritual life, unburdened by the repetitive toil of farming, the diseases that came with crowded settlements, and the social it into a massive, creative, spiritual undertaking. This idea is supported by some modern anthropological studies which suggest that some hunter-gatherer societies actually spent far fewer hours per day working to secure food than early agricultural societies did. Farming is hierarchies that emerged with the ownership of land. The builders of Göbekli Tepe were not primitive. They were master stonemasons. They were sophisticated artists. They were practical engineers. They were keen observers of the night sky. Hard, back-breaking, and relentless work. It is possible that the world before agriculture was not a desperate struggle, but for they possessed a complex social structure that allowed them to organize large-scale labor projects over many generations. They were, in short, a kind of original affluent society, a lost golden age where humanity had a more balanced relationship with the natural world, allowing just as intelligent, creative, and complex as we are. Göbekli Tepe forces us to treat our hunter for a rich cultural and spiritual life that we have completely forgotten. Göbekli Tepe may be the sole surviving monument from gatherer ancestors with a newfound respect, seeing them not as cavemen, but as the authors of a complex and successful this lost world, a testament to a time when our ancestors were not just surviving but thriving. The story way of life that lasted for tens of thousands of years, a chapter of the human story that we have profoundly misunderstood and of Göbekli Tepe is one of creation on an unimaginable scale. But as we have seen, it is also underestimated. The story of Göbekli Tepe's life is revolutionary, but the story of its death a story of deliberate destruction, or rather, deliberate burial. This act is as profound and mysterious as the construction itself, and it is just as perplexing and significant. This brings us to our third thematic revolution, a mystery wrapped in an enigma. Forms our third revolutionary theme, the purposeful forgetting, or the enigma of the deliberate burial. Around 8,000 BC riddle of the purposeful forgetting, the deliberate burial of the site. When a great city or temple, after more than 1,500 years of use, the people of the region began to bury Göbekli Tepe of the ancient world falls, it usually follows a familiar pattern. It is conquered and destroyed in war. It is shaken. This was not a slow process of abandonment. It was a conscious and laborious act. They filled the sacred enclosures with millions of tons of rubble, animal bones, and earth, until the towering pillars were completely submerged. They entombed their own cathedral to rubble by an earthquake. Or it is simply abandoned, its people moving away, leaving the structures to be slowly worn down by wind and rain, and eventually covered by the sands of time. Göbekli Tepe follows none of these patterns. Why? This question is perhaps the deepest mystery of the site, and the possible answers challenge our understanding of cultural change. Its end was as deliberate and organized as its beginning. Around 800 BC, after more than one theory is that the burial was an act of profound respect, a way of decommissioning a sacred space that 500 years of use, the people of the region began to bury it. This was a monumental undertaking. They filled was no longer in use. As new, smaller enclosures were built, the older, grander ones were respectfully put to rest the sacred enclosures with millions of pieces of rubble, animal bones, and earth. They did this carefully, packing the material around, their spirits contained and protected within the hill. Another, more dramatic theory ties back to the comet impact hypothesis. If the standing pillars until the entire complex was submerged, they created the very hill that would protect their creation for the next 10. Göbekli Tepe was built to commemorate a terrifying cataclysm. Perhaps after centuries, the memory became too burdensome. 000 years. This wasn't an abandonment. It was an interment. They were holding a funeral for the rituals too freighted with fear. Perhaps a new generation of leaders or a new belief system arose that wanted to break most sacred place. Why? Why would a society that invested generations of effort into building a sacred center then invest with this dark past? Burying the temple would have been a way of burying the trauma, of consciously choosing to forget similar effort into hiding it from the world. This act of purposeful forgetting is one of the site's deepest mysteries and move on, literally putting the past behind them. A third possibility is that the burial was an act of rebellion. Perhaps the world had changed. The climate was stabilizing after the Younger Dryas. The agricultural revolution was now in full swing, and the construction and maintenance of Göbekli Tepe would have required a powerful priesthood and a hierarchical social structure to organize the labor. Perhaps, after centuries of this system, the common people grew tired of the immense work required to support the temple people were living in settled villages. It's possible that the old religion of the nomadic hunters, with its sky gods and animal and its elite, the burial could have been the ultimate act of social revolution, a symbolic rejection of the old gods and the old spirits, was no longer relevant to the new life of the farmers. The old gods had to be put to rest to make way for the new. The burial was a way of closing a chapter, of marking the end of one worldview and the beginning of ways of life, a leveling of the sacred mountain as they moved towards a new, more decentralized way of living in agricultural another. Or perhaps the reason was darker. If the temple really was a memorial to a terrifying cosmic impact, maybe villages. Whatever the reason, the purposeful forgetting is a key part of the story. It tells us that history is not just a passive accumulation of events, but an active process of remembering and choosing what to forget. The builders of Göbekli later generations found the memory too burdensome, too frightening. Perhaps the rituals associated with it were seen as dangerous, capable of calling Tepe were not just the authors of the first chapter of monumental history. They were also its first editors, choosing to redact down another catastrophe. Burying the temple would have been an attempt to sever ties with a traumatic past, to literally put their own story and leaving us to wonder about the reasons for their silence. This brings us to our final, overarching theme, the terrifying memory underground. Whatever the reason, the deliberate burial is a powerful statement. It tells us that these ancient people had. Göbekli Tepe is not just a ruin. It is a message. It is a bridge across an immense chasm of a sense of their own history. They were not just living in the moment. They were actively curating their own past time, connecting our modern technological world with the mind of our Ice Age ancestors. This is the message from the Ice Age, choosing what to pass on and what to consign to oblivion. They chose to forget Göbekli Tepe, and in doing, and the great unanswered question. The site proves beyond any doubt that 12,000 years ago they inadvertently created a perfect time capsule, a message in a bottle for a distant future that they could never have conceived. Our ancestors were not the simple, grunting cavemen of popular imagination. They were us. They were anatomically modern humans of. This brings us to the final and most personal revolution that Göbekli Tepe offers. It with minds as complex and curious as our own. They were wrestling with the same big questions that we still wrestle with today. Where is the realization that this ancient site is not just about the past? It is a message directed at us. In the present did we come from? Why are we here? What is our place in the universe? They were watching the stars. This is the theme of a message from the Ice Age and the ultimate unanswered question. For millennia we have told, mapping their movements, and building sophisticated observatories to track the cycles of the cosmos. They were developing complex mythologies and ourselves a story of linear progress. We see ourselves at the pinnacle of a long, steady climb from primitive ignorance to modern, creating powerful art to express their relationship with the natural world and the spirit realm. They were honoring their dead, contemplating the mystery enlightenment. Göbekli Tepe stands as a profound challenge to this arrogant narrative. It is a mirror held up to our own time, showing us that 12,000 years ago, our ancestors were already wrestling with the very same of consciousness and building for an eternity they could not see. They were, in short, fully human, fully aware fundamental questions that we grapple with today. Who are we? Where do we come from? What is our place in the universe? And deeply engaged in the project of making meaning out of existence. Göbekli Tepe is the oldest and most profound evidence. They were not just concerned with food and shelter. They were looking up at the stars and trying to map their place in of this ancient intellectual heritage. It is a monument to a lost chapter of the human story, a chapter we never even the cosmos. They were contemplating the great mysteries of life and death, and building for an eternity they believed in. They were driven by a powerful need to create meaning, to build something larger than themselves, to participate in a shared, sacred story new was missing. It stands as a silent rebuke to our own chronological arrogance, the idea that we are the pinnacle of a. Göbekli Tepe proves that our capacity for abstract thought, for complex spirituality, and for monumental creativity is not a recent long, slow climb out of ignorance. It suggests that history is not a straight line of progress, but a series of cycles with development. It is an ancient, fundamental part of what it means to be human. It has been with us since the dawn peaks of knowledge and troughs of forgetting. And so, we are left with the great unanswered question that echoes from the stones of our consciousness. The central, unanswered question that echoes from the stones is this: what did they know that we have forgotten of that Turkish hill? What did they know that we have forgotten? What understanding of the cosmos of consciousness? In our modern, secular, fast-paced world, have we lost something that they possessed? Have we lost that of our own place in the world did they possess that we have lost? Göbekli Tepe does not provide deep, instinctual connection to the cycles of nature, to the movements of the cosmos, and to the spiritual dimension of existence the answer. But its very existence proves that the question is valid. It invites us to look at our own past not. Göbekli Tepe is a humbling reminder that our civilization is just one very recent way of being human. It stands as a silent monument to a lost chapter of our own story, a chapter filled with a wisdom and a worldview that we are with condescension, but with a newfound sense of humility and wonder, and to accept that the deepest mysteries of humanity are only just beginning to appreciate. The Potbelly Hill has given up some of its secrets, but its ultimate message may be a challenge to us. To look at our own world, our own beliefs, and our own place in time, with not just in the stars above, but also buried deep in the earth beneath our feet. Göbekli Tepe is more than just the world's oldest temple. It is a portal back to the very dawn of human consciousness. It challenges our definitions of civilization and primitive. It shows us that the urge to find our place in the cosmos, to build, to worship, to create meaning is not a luxury of settled life, but is perhaps the most fundamental human drive of all. For millennia, the Potbelly Hill held its secrets, waiting for a generation ready to listen. The circles are still being excavated, with perhaps 95% of the site still buried underground. What other secrets, what other impossible truths, are still waiting beneath the soil? The story of Göbekli Tepe is far from over. It is just beginning. Thanks for exploring history's mysteries with Ancient Relics Keeper. Like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. What secret should we unravel next? Stay curious and see you soon.